Welcome to the Akita Show. I'm your host, Masaki Miyagawa, and tonight we have a very special guest, and we are going to go way out there because he's an expert in some very interesting topics. I'm talking about James Bartley. James is an abductee who has been exposed to high levels of spiritual warfare. He studied in England and Germany and is also a student of military history with an emphasis on intelligence, counterintelligence, and special operations. James has worked in the semiconductor industry, the telecommunications industry, and in county government as an ombudsman. James also worked for the civil service at a major military command in an intelligence-related capacity. He is a former business owner. And James, I know you used to have your own radio show. So welcome to the show.
Thank you, Masaki. It's an honor to be here. I'm really looking forward to our discussion today.
How did this all start? Because this is really a lifelong study for you.
It is. It really started in childhood. I didn't realize at the time I was having alien abduction experiences on a conscious level. I did, after a regression, which I thought was a failed regression in 1991, early 1990s, I did flash back a few days after the hypnotic regression to a previously unremembered childhood abduction. It wasn't an abduction. It was a visitation by a brown, floating, very small being who spoke to me for a little while. And for many years, I consciously remembered that experience. In fact, I told all my friends and anyone who would listen about it, and they kind of humored me, didn't take me very seriously. And then, as is the case, I've since come to understand with other abductees, this seminal event, which I would have thought I'd never forget, was somehow erased from my conscious memory until many years later. I had that hypnotic regression, which I thought was a failed regression. Nothing new came up in it. No new information into the particular experiences I was delving into was dredged out of my subconscious. However, my subconscious was shaken up enough for me to remember this childhood experience. And overlaying on top of that, if that's a word, is a whole lifetime of phenomena, of psychic experiences, UFO sightings, objects appearing and disappearing, and like beings and entities being seen in my household. Not only me seeing these beings, but family members, our dogs would react to these visitors. And I'm of Filipino descent, so my folks, being Filipino, they don't have this mechanistic reductionist mindset about these kinds of things. To them, especially in the old country, anything to do with phenomena, anything to do with unusual, supernatural, if you will, experiences is taken as a given. It's regarded as being part of our everyday real world. And then in the case of the Philippines, of course, you overlay the whole Catholic guilt trip and everything else on top of that. You see what I mean? So I've always been interested in the subject because I had experienced things. I just didn't know how deeply involved I was. So from an early age, not only was I reading Greek mythology and military history, but I was delving into the Bermuda Triangle, reading about Sasquatch and reading about UFOs and reading about other dimensions. And a lot of you listeners from way back will remember books like The Outer Space Connection, and which later became a documentary. I was all into that stuff, and Chariots of the Gods, of course, with Von Daniken. And it all came to a head when I was on the verge of coming back home from Germany. My last couple of weeks there, I'd spent the summer in 1990 in southern Germany, right along the Rhine River across from Switzerland. And I started getting this feeling that I had when I was younger of being watched and getting this feeling of being under surveillance, if you will. I started sleeping with the lights on again, like I did as a child. And you have to be on the southern, in the Black Forest, in the southern part of Germany. I mean, it's reminiscent of the tales of Hansel and Gretel. I mean, the Black Forest and all that stuff. So that's kind of a prelude. And then I went back home to San Jose, California, and then within a matter of weeks, I had all these UFO experiences, including a fully waking conscious alien abduction. So that's where it all started. Then I did a life review, writing down everything I could think of what seemed to be a supernatural or psychic nature. And after
Mhm.
several pages, I realized that whatever this was, it had been with me all along. And so at that point, when I knew that there was an alien UFO component, I really started delving into the research.
Well, one that's interesting because you never hear about, uh, say, the Asians, not typically mentioned in the ET UFO research, but it happened to you. And then also, I think your family's military, right? So you think that had something to do with it?
I think that my father, being former active duty Navy,
Hmm.
and hence whoever his masters were and controllers, et cetera, et cetera. I
Hmm.
don't mean that in a mind control Milab sense. I mean the chain of command
Hmm.
would have had access to the blood type of our whole family because being military dependents, we were kind of at their mercy. You see what I mean? Because like, they were not involved in any way, shape, or form in any of this activity. Uh,
Hmm.
However, being military parents, when their kids get sick, they take their children to military hospitals,
Right.
and I believe that it's quite possible that having access to all that DNA, all that blood work and whatnot, they got a pretty good idea of who or what I am, and that's not unusual. I mean, this is something that has come up in the stories of many people who've had stints, active duty stints in the military. I've spoken to
Hmm.
many former military personnel who are alien abductees and who describe being plugged into at some point during their military careers into these weird science, alien related mind control projects. So yes, I believe it's gotten to the point and has been for some time where there's something within the DNA profile, within the blood work, markers, if you will, which tell people within that community, these
Hmm.
black ops elements within the military, and alert them to the fact that certain people may be having alien experiences. I do believe that's the case.
Well, today we're told that everybody's the same. It's all multiculturalism, and one person's no different than another. But we know that they are highly interested in bloodlines and genetics and all of that. So it goes along with what you're saying.
Yes, it's true, and it should be noted that people who have alien encounters and/or encounters with subterranean beings, interdimensional beings, they're not mutually exclusive. Sometimes one kind of entity can wear all of those hats. It crosses all ethnic uh, ethnic categories. As far
Hmm.
as I know, virtually every ethnicity, every race of person on this planet has had these kinds of experiences. It's not relegated to a particular blood type. I was talking to my mentor, the late Barbara Bartholomew, about this, and she was of the opinion, and I have no reason to doubt her, that the aliens of the parasitic variety, they will find a use for everyone on this planet, whether it's just drawing loosh out of them, if you will, the
Hmm.
negative emotions and of rage and anger and sorrow and etc., and then milk people of these negative emotions for all they're worth in the overall scheme of things. But on the other hand, they can also become quite specific in their needs from certain people and bloodlines, as far as genetics, as far as whatever latent metaphysical abilities that they tap into these bloodlines. So the long and the short of it is everyone on this planet is influenced directly by the unseen non-human control system.
So, as I understand it, you really started getting into the research in the '90s, right?
Yes, because I left San Jose, California in the early 1990s, about 90, 91. And I don't know what it's like now, but back then, it seemed to me that San Jose was kind of a backwater as far as UFO research was concerned. I tried to network with people. Nobody seemed to be interested. Everyone seemed to be really possessive. Oh, you can't talk to my abductees, right? And I would say, oh, well, I've had experiences too. I just want to, compare and contrast and, see what we have in common. But there was a lot of that going on, a lot of gatekeeping, if you will, and a lot of empire building. So when the opportunity came for me to move to San Diego, well, I jumped all over that and eventually found myself in San Diego, California. And I eventually joined the San Diego UFO Society, which was a seminal event in my life. Because the San Diego UFO Society was a top level UFO research group that networked with some of the top well-known and not so well-known UFO researchers, not only across America, but throughout Latin America, Puerto Rico, Europe, South America. Yeah, I mean, it was a really well-connected bunch. And what we did was we would often pool our researchers, our efforts rather, with other like-minded groups in Orange County, in LA, and elsewhere throughout the Southwest if we wanted to bring over speakers from elsewhere, right? We'd all like combine our efforts and pay for the airfare and arrange the lodging, and then we'd bring these speakers over. And every month in the San Diego UFO Society, we had some great speakers. One of the most important ones I've ever listened to, who still doesn't get the credit he deserves, is Larry Warren, the uh, the one guy who's spoken out about what really happened at Bentwaters, how there was an alien element there. It wasn't just soldiers chasing lights in the forest. There was a landed craft. Entities came out of it. It was a pretty heavy deal, which has been really minimalized over the years. And
Where was that at?
that was late December 1980. I think it was the 3 days leading up to Christmas, thereabouts, in December 1980 in Suffolk, England.
Oh, okay.
Uh, Royal Air Force Base, Woodbridge, and Bentwaters were kind of a dual base. And Bentwaters was the American base, Woodbridge was the Royal Air Force Base. And that was where a lot of tactical nukes were stored. And the history of that area was rife with non-human phenomena, if you will. And there's a whole underground element to Larry Warren's story where he and others were taken underground, drugged, debriefed. And as Larry says, that he was one of the first people to talk about underground bases and a military alien connection, right? And that's true. He was one of the first to talk about that. So Larry was an example of the kind of speaker that we brought over. And a lot of the research we were doing dealt with alien abductions, but also contact experiences with more positively orientated, spiritually evolved beings, and it ran the gamut. But when we delved into the hardcore stuff, we delved into the hardcore stuff like reptilian abductions, as well as military abductions, because it was in the early 90s when as a member of the San Diego UFO Society that I first became aware of what we called back then military type cases, because we didn't know what else to call them. It was only later um, Hans Lammers, I think his name is, he coined the term Milabs or Milab, depending on how you pronounce it, a military abductee. But unfortunately, he kind of dismissed the accounts of these Milabs, the accounts of aliens and alien craft as being the result of CIA narco hypnosis. So he didn't see he was like many people. I don't think that he was intentionally trying to be this way. A lot of people are really hamstrung by the limitations of their understanding, biases, pre-programming. So in his worldview, aliens don't exist. Ergo, the people reporting aliens and alien craft and aliens and humans working together, it had to be the result of mind control, right? So, but nothing could be further from the truth. There really is an alien, non-human element that is behind everything on this planet.
Now, these experiences,
they fall into so many categories. You have I guess, UFO sightings. You have interdimensional. You have kind of occult, magical things. I mean, how do you categorize these things? And oh, you've also talked about project people. So could you tell us kind of like what these different categories are that you guys were having contacts with?
Well, for me, the term project people, the way I've always used it, is a generic term to describe, it's an umbrella term to describe people that are in one type of mind control program or another.
Mm-hmm.
And then you can break it down further. Uh, a lot of us have heard, I'm sure you have, of the Monarch MK Ultra mind control program,
Mm-hmm.
trauma-based programming. And then there's the Milab uh, aspect, which I'm familiar with and which I do a lot of investigations on. And a MyLab, in my definition, is a person who is a legitimate alien abductee who also on occasion is, and sometimes quite frequently, depending on the individual, kidnapped, debriefed, trained, and utilized as an operative, sometimes in their physical 3D body, also in their astral body, and sometimes in a higher dimensional, higher state of being context. But
Mm-hmm.
there is some overlap too, and some enmeshment, because some My Labs do have a ceremonial magic, satanic ritual abuse, SRA ritual abuse aspect to their background, to their story. But it may not be the central part of it. Whereas the monarchs, how I would differentiate it between a monarch and a MyLab, and in our example, a MyLab with some SRA in their experience, is a monarch. Their experiences are heavily orientated towards the satanic ritual abuse, ceremonial magical aspect of things, even though they themselves may have alien encounters, reptilian encounters, military encounters.
Mm-hmm.
But I would still regard some of them as monarchs by my labs. And there is definitely a ceremonial magical aspect to this. Uh, and again, there is some overlap because some people that I regard as my labs that have been taken to underground bases and off-world installations and have seen deep black elements of the military, aerospace, medical community working in conjunction with non-human life forms, not just extraterrestrials, if you will, but subterranean beings that have been here pretty much all along. Uh, in some of those projects, there will also be a magical,
Mm-hmm.
ceremonial, magical aspect, if you will. So it's not either or. It's not all black and white. There are a lot of shades of gray.
Mm-hmm. I just brought that up because, anybody that has spent some time looking at this, uh, to the mainstream, a lot of times it's presented as lights in the sky and are there even aliens? Are there real UFOs? But you start digging into it and you find this overlap between the dark, occult, magical, which would seem like wizards and warlocks, but actually has a long history with this ET interdimensional element. So.
Absolutely, because these astronomer priests that were installed as hybrid, alien hybrid, oftentimes reptilian human hybrid, or Draco human hybrid. The Dracos are the winged gargoyle reptilians. Uh, Hybridization is a key element of this control system, and a lot of these different parasitical negative ETs have imbued their DNA, their attributes, their characteristics, and indeed some of their metaphysical powers, latent abilities, into various uh, bloodline streams. And then they've, over time, maneuvered these bloodlines into key influential positions all across society, at all strata of society. Initially, it was probably these astronomer priest, hybridized astronomer priest, that were the initial kind of go between the gods, if you will, these aliens masquerading oftentimes as gods, and the common people. These hybridized astronomer priests in these patriarchal societies. Uh, Basically, they interpreted the laws laid down and the dictates of these gods, and they meted out punishments, and then their word was law, and it was all about harsh patriarchy and eradicating the divine feminine and all forms of divine mother goddess worship, the original, if you will, form of worship on this planet of the many indigenous societies worldwide. Uh, there has been a concerted effort to eradicate all of that, and what we see today is uh, this harsh, misogynistic, patriarchal, woman-hating, child-molesting kind of system, which has been set up. It's not an accident that the ruling elite indulge in these kinds of things, and so that's where we find ourselves today.
Well, I mean, this is exactly the reason why I find your research so fascinating is because the Milabs and people that have had these kinds of experiences are kind of like the canary in the coal mine, and they they show a kind of a framework which is not apparent to the above board people that are just finding out about the Federal Reserve and the corruption in politics, and that's sort of the surface level. But I mean, really, it's no joke to say that the problems that we are dealing with are cosmic. they,
Yes,
they go
yes,
they go I mean, they go interdimensional, really. So.
yes. And Crowley himself said, I'm going to pause while I take a sip of water here. Crowley himself talked about extraterrestrials and how even in the ceremonial magic where a circle is drawn around the adept as he or she uh, invokes elementals or it tries to invoke the uh, the presence or the powers, if you will, of various non-human intelligences. He likens the human in the circle, oftentimes in actual fact a hybridized human, because the hybridized humans tend to have these metaphysical abilities, right? And these metaphysical abilities run the gamut from simple astral travel to remote viewing to the ability to work with intentions and cause people serious harm from a distance, actual teleportation and ability to manifest and demanifest. I mean, anything you see in the X-Men and in some of these supernatural movies where there's warlocks and wizards that can do these things, that is real, and a lot of it has to do with an understanding of how nature really works, as well as the ability to work with intentions and the ability to work with elements and whatnot. And so what Crowley said was the human in the circle, the human adept in the circle, is the microcosm. Everything outside, including deep outer space, is the and all the intelligences and all the intelligent life forms throughout the cosmos is outside the circle, but still in a macro and microcosmic sense interlinked and indivisible, right? So uh, he was very well aware of this non-human element here on Earth that was subtly and not so subtly guiding the affairs of humanity. And getting back to the notion about ceremonial magic, some of the MyLabs I've spoken to, who I would regard as MyLabs, even though they've gone through a lot of SRA and ritual abuse, in some of the projects, they are. You can find on my website an interview with Angelia Cardwell, who was an amazing gal, and she's went back under the radar because of all the harassment and abuse she's been subjected to, often from people claiming to be within the community, the mind control targeted individual activist community. Many of her tormentors were, go figure, within that group. Anyhow, she talked about in some of the projects she was involved in, she would see how these adepts, these warlocks, for lack of a better term, in the underground bases, would activate certain chakras within the MyLab, and based on the frequency of a given chakra, they can open a certain portal into a certain realm or a certain dimension, right? And and of course you have the the trauma-based mind control, and the trauma-based mind control is inherently reptilian. And if your listeners, I'm sure some of them are familiar with the term reptilian. It describes in a generic sense a particular type of being that's lizard-like, serpent-like in appearance, humanoid, sometimes, oftentimes with a tail, sometimes not, because there's various hybrid variations of given reptilians, and there's various species of reptilians. Some are green, some are brown, some are what we call yellow bellies. They have lighter undersides compared to the rest of their body, very similar to what you see on Earth reptiles like lizards and crocodiles and whatnot. And the humanoid variety of these reptilian beings, and some of them we call dinos because they kind of look like big dinosaurs. Some of them, not all of them, because not all of them are bad or as what we would perceive to be negative or evil. In fact, there's entire planets in the cosmos that are populated by positive reptilians. I believe that. I've heard this from highly credible people. But the ones that are negative, that basically prey on humans and utilize them as a resource in a variety of ways, they have they have imbued their characteristics through a long-term genetic manipulation of key hybridized bloodlines. And this is why the elite, so-called, of this world, who wind up being in high finance industry in Hollywood and whatnot, uh, they indulge in all this pedophilia. They indulge in satanic ritual abuse. They indulge in human sacrifice. And people must understand that the centrality of the gods, if you will, the gods, and anyone who's studied ancient history, anyone who's watched really good shows, in my view, like Rome, the HBO series, Rome, and as well as like the Vikings, which is another good show I like. When they talk about the gods and the seeming centrality of the gods in their lives, how the gods seem to control every aspect and they have to appease the gods and they give sacrifices to the gods. And that was such a commonality after the divine mother goddess form of worship had pretty much been eradicated or went underground. Suddenly, sacrifices, not only of animals, but also of people, became the norm. Before a battle, a big battle, they would do a sacrifice. If they wanted to find, some kind of sign or portents of a coming battle, or if a male heir was going to be born to a king or some lord, they would slaughter an animal and check the entrails. And there's a variety of things they do, but people today have to realize that these elite, so-called, when they indulge in these sordid rituals, uh, they're not worshiping other, what we would perceive to be evil humans. The hierarchy goes above and beyond these hybridized humans. They're invoking and they're communing with, interacting with, getting guidance and direction from mostly non-human entities. Some are in the physical 3D. Some of these beings can manifest for various periods of time in the 3D realm. Some of the reptilians, pretty much in the underground bases, subterranean cavern systems, down there, they're pretty much always in physical 3D embodiment. They don't have any reason to not be, but they also have this ability to alter their frequency, to change their resonance, if you will. And so it should be understood that it's this unique kind of, I wouldn't say unique, but it's this enclosed system. It's this closed circle of these hybridized elite that have been maneuvered into position. I mean, see David Icke's work, to rule this planet. And they're not like us. They don't think like us. They don't have the same dreams as us. They don't have the same visions as us. In fact, their neurology, everything about them is different. We welcome our young into the world by nurturing them, loving them, teaching them. They welcome their young into the world by abusing and torturing them. It's an entirely different mindset, and people have to be able to wrap their minds around that. And so this is why the elite indulge in all the symbology. And what they also do is they grab hold of existing symbology, some of it from the original mother goddess worship, stand it on its head, and then call it their own symbology. So a lot of people, especially of a fundamentalist Christian bent, they see any symbol and they think it's satanic or they think it's demonic, but that's not always the case. It's just, the symbol has been perverted, the meaning behind it, and then the the rituals have been accommodated to incorporate some of these long-standing symbols that have been around long before this harsh patriarchal system was installed. So, yes, people have to wrap their minds around the fact that humans are not in charge here. But that's changing, and we can talk more about that later. I do believe that the tide has turned.
Well, you moved down to San Diego, which is it's in the Southern California region. This is a hotspot, and we were talking about magic. Hollywood is all about magic. I mean, you really moved to where the action is going on. It's happening everywhere, but particularly down here, we have the military bases, we have the entertainment. There's a lot going on down here in Southern California. So, what kind of things were you guys finding in the '90s in San Diego?
Well, it was not just the active research. It was just it was also people that became close friends that
Mm-hmm.
it turns out in their background they would have SRA not only from growing up in California but from elsewhere throughout the U.S. or other places in the world. So that's of course how pervasive the ritual abuse is. So some of my fellow researchers and people who attended these conferences would have this in their background, not just SRA, but also there would be a Milab component or an abduction component. Like for example, uh, throughout Southern California, like you just mentioned, there is all kinds of uh, occult, if you will, and that just means hidden, but occult activity all across the board. And then you overlay on top of that the deep black military aerospace element. There are more military bases and defense contractors, if you will, in Southern California than you can shake a stick at. I mean, they're everywhere, and a lot of them have underground bases, tunnel systems, and many of them interconnect, right? And they interconnect, and they have high speed, what are known as maglev trains, magnetically levitated. They don't actually run along and make physical contact with the train track. They kind of float along at high speed on a cushion of magnetism and the elevators, some of the elevators in the underground bases work along the same line. So it was an area that was rife with the kind of activity a real serious researcher uh, would be interested in. The underground base activity where non-human entities and deep black elements of the military scientific community work side by side. Edwards Air Force Base, China Lake, the high desert of Southern California, the aerospace community there in the Antelope Valley, all the different underground bases beneath, like the Helendale facility for Lockheed, the Northrop facility further north in the Tehachapi Mountains, infamous place where there's large underground base beneath a mountain, and alien craft have been seen to fly in and out of there. People have been taken underground by the military and ETs into that Northrop facility known as the Ant Hill by the locals because it's known. Because in these underground facilities, someone needs to build the tunnel system. Someone needs to lay in the cement. Someone needs to lay in the wiring. I mean, you have electricians down there. You have contractors down there, and these people talk. They tell stories, and they see things.
Well, I personally know a guy that just to show how pervasive this is. Like, you just scratch the surface and you're gonna find this everywhere, but it's really only the people that are looking that are seeing this stuff. One of the oldest studio lots in the LA area has some kind of underground facility underneath. I personally know a guy that saw it, and he doesn't know what it is, but he says he took an elevator down and he looks around. It's like one minute you're on a movie lot, and then you go down, and then you're in like NASA. And he says, I don't know what it was, but it didn't look like it was supposed to be there, and nobody talks about it. But I personally know a guy that's seen this stuff.
Was he in the film industry, or was he like a contractor of some kind?
He was working on the lot, and they knew he was sort of into conspiracy stuff, and it's
it's been a long time rumor that uh, that there's stuff underneath the studio lot. So they everybody knows this is this one building, but luckily he didn't get caught. But that's somebody I personally know, and you know,
Wow,
mhm.
wow. Yeah, yeah, I believe that. And a lot of these tunnel entrances can be in places that are by all outward appearances quite innocuous, like a corporate office building, right? There could be an area, a special elevator in a certain area that'll take you underground, uh, beneath certain shopping centers and shopping malls. There are underground tunnel systems, and also offshore, like near Redondo Beach. If memory serves, there's an old abandoned SeaWorld over there, and some of the locals have seen craft come out of the water just offshore, and they have seen onshore while the craft are coming out of the water. This is at nighttime. Uh, what the locals have seen, and in some cases, like a security guard, they've seen these deep black spooky people in like big black Suburbans and with tinted windows. And then when they get out of their, these cars, some of them are dressed in business suits, some are dressed like in black SWAT type unis, and they're there and they're observing these craft coming out of the water. And so, whatever it was going on there, they were not frightened or shocked or had any kind of a negative reaction to it. It seemed to be the norm for them. So there's something going on just offshore, but that's the case in large areas of Southern California. Uh, oh geez, what's that island where the Navy SEALs do a lot of their land warfare training underwater? San Clemente Island. There's all kinds of stuff that happens there, and Catalina Island not too far away. Uh, and also there's areas along the Southern California coast where there have been times when there'd be like a big mass UFO wave, and then the military would be sending out National Guard alert craft, or the Navy would be sending out interceptors, and the Air Force would be sending out interceptors, and there'd be helicopters flying all over the place, and UFOs flying over the land and offshore. That kind of thing happens in Southern California.
Well, in my opinion, I'm born and grown in L.A. I pretty much grew up in the shadow of the Hollywood sign.
Yeah.
Like the Griffith Observatory was in line of sight of the patio where I grew up, and in my opinion, this whole Southern California area and LA in particular, it's some kind of portal or vortex area, and it has all those Lemurian connections, and according to the Chumash, this area was being sort of like maintained and guarded by their priests, and when they got kicked out and dispossessed, the whole balance of this area kind of flipped. But it's still a portal area. It's just being used for a different purpose now.
Yes. What or who are the Chumash?
The Chumash, they're the tribe that I think they're from like Santa Barbara down to San Diego.
Oh, okay.
And it's interesting too that Robert Stanley's written some articles about this. Uh, the Chumash, they're sort of like setup of how they see the universe is you have three layers: the realm of the gods, then you have the human world, and then you have an underworld of lost souls and demons. And when the balance is lost, these sort of like lower energies start creeping up into our world, right? But what's interesting is that's exactly the same as the Norse legends, right? The nine realms.
Yes.
It's it,
Yes.
it,
That's
it's
ex
it's
yes.
it's three, three, and three. It's like the gods. Then you have Midgard, where we are, and then you have the lower realms of the demons and the lost souls. And I think it's the same legend, really. And basically
Yes.
that's where we are now. Like, there's so much activity here because it is a power spot, but the natives got kicked out, and now this vortex area is being inhabited by all this Milab stuff and the military bases, etc.
Yes. A lot of the Milabs that I've met in Southern California, a lot of them also lived in the dusty high desert kind of towns, like Ridgecrest, uh, the China Lake area, the Antelope Valley, Palmdale, Lancaster, places like that are rife with all these underground bases and tunnel systems and whatnot. And whereas in other parts of the country, people may have quote unquote just ET experiences because of that military deep black weird science overlay, and of course there's also that ceremonial magic overlay too. The people like in the high desert of Southern California, they tend, it's not across the board, not everyone, but a lot of people tend to have this military element in their lives, because in the San Diego UFO Society, when I first started hearing about these military type cases, I of course I was interested in them, and as time went on, I was briefed on a number of these types of cases. Again, we call them military type cases back then. And the people that had gone public in the early days were people like Leisha Davidson. She lived in L.A., the L.A. area. There was Diane Johnson, who was a personal friend of mine. She lived up in the Ridgecrest area near China Lake. She would be taken 1 week by the military, by the Air Force, and taken beneath George Air Force Base, which has since been sold to some kind of contractor, right? Uh, and the next week she'd be taken by the Navy, and they would use her in remote viewing. When you hear people talk about, oh, the remote viewing program started with Stanford Research Institute, and then it spread out from there to the CIA, Defense Intelligence Agency. No, some of these MyLabs were compelled to do remote viewing in the 60s, at least as far back as the 1960s, long before Hal Puthoff and Keith Harari and company uh, began writing about this and started the Stanford Research Institute program. What the military told Diane Johnson was that there is a gland in her brain which has either atrophied or disappeared entirely amongst most people on Earth. But for some reason, it's this gland is still present and still active in her family tree, right? And so by eliciting hormonal secretions from this gland, it induces these heightened states of awareness, if you will, including what we would call remote viewing now. So they used her for like a variety of psychic purposes. But it goes back to what we were talking about earlier. They track these bloodlines. And long before there was an established military on the surface, that's what these hybridized elitist bloodlines did also. And if it was a bloodline that they were not working with or related to, if they could not co-opt it in some way, they would try to eradicate it. And that is also one of the reasons why they're systematically wiping out all these indigenous societies, because they're taking away the elders and all their earth-based forms of worship, so on and so forth with it, right? Some of these Native American elders in the sweat lodge ceremonies, they don't just sit there and just soak up all the sweat. I mean, sometimes they're in telepathic contact with one another. That's the same also in Australia, where the Aboriginal people and Aboriginal children, if they live in an Aboriginal tribe that is far away from society, which is why the powers that be, they don't want people living off the reservation, and the reservation in this sense would be the cities and where everything is built up, where they're dependent upon the system. They don't want, especially native peoples, to be living on their own. So they're trying to eradicate them or herd them or corral them in some way. And in these tribes, Aboriginals in our example, the children are telepathic, so they still talk to each other in this way. And see, like when the white people came to Australia, they would say things like, "Oh, these blacks, they're really stupid. They just sit around. They don't even say anything to one another." Well, they're telepathic. They don't need to talk to each other. That's what we have to do. You know what I mean?
Right.
And so we have to get to a point where we have that ability again, and it's latent within us. A lot of us have had spontaneous manifestations of remote viewing or telepathy or this or that. It's, if we really stop and think about it, a lot of us have had these kinds of experiences. So we just got to get back into that state of expanded awareness and consciousness. A good book to start, well, two good books, would be Michael Talbot's book, The Holographic Universe, and then another book that he wrote, I think it's called Beyond the Quantum. And those are two really good books that will give the reader a really good example of what humans are actually capable of doing.
Well, the whole subject of the Milabs and I guess a lot of the MK Ultra mind control, it seemed that they had ways of, like you're saying, really unleashing this latent psychic intuitive ability. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Yes, within the morphogenetic blueprint resonance, what Rupert Sheldrake talks about, the M field or the morphic resonance field, within our DNA and within our the energetic field around us, within that is our latent metaphysical powers, for lack of a better term, especially in certain hybridized bloodlines. And in this context, when I'm talking about hybrids, I'm just not talking about an individual or a family, a group of people in a multi-generational bloodline that have ancestral roots, if you will, from one ET race or from the reptilians or from one star system. A lot of people out there, and certainly a lot of these Milabs, they have within their DNA profile, if you will, the genetic elements from a number of different ET civilizations, some of which reside in higher dimensional places, higher planes, if you will. And all that institutional knowledge and wisdom and the latent metaphysical powers are still there. Now, the more negatively orientated ETs and subterranean beings, and also the deep black military, often in league with the negative beings, they have long since figured out how to tap into this within the individual or individuals and exploit those latent metaphysical capabilities. It's very common to hear Milabs talk about how they were made to be what we call astral operators, sent off to not only different places in this world as an astral operator, as an astral spy, but sometimes the other realms entirely, other planes and other dimensions. So, like I said earlier, the example I used with Diane Johnson, she was compelled to do remote viewing by the military, and I know other Milabs that have been made to do the same thing. But it must be understood, in the overall scheme of things, these abilities are taken for granted and utilized on a routine basis by a lot of these indigenous societies that the powers that be, the reptilian hybridized bloodlines, have been systematically wiping out, right? A lot of these elders, they have these abilities. You see, like, for example, a paradox has occurred when they don't like to talk about this in lamestream archaeology. Well, why are they finding Australian Aboriginal skeletons all over the place, not just in Australia, but in North America, here and there? It conflicts with so much of what they think they know, right? And then if they're pressed, if they're forced to concede, yes, that Australian Aboriginal skeletons and remains have been found in North America, and you ask them, well, how do they get there? Their default setting, which they're still going to have a hard time wrapping their minds around, is, oh, well, they must have got there in some kind of flimsy craft. Well, that's that reductionist, like materialistic way of looking at things again. Because in actual fact, a lot of these shamans, a lot of these elders, a lot of these medicine men, medicine women, they utilize and have for centuries and for countless millennia, they have utilized the worldwide portal system. They step into a portal in one part of the world and they pop out in another part of the world, or they step into a portal one end of their country, they pop out in another end. That's how they do it. They know how to use these portals. They've been taught to use these portals within the context of their ceremonies and their teachings. Not only do humans utilize these portals, and again, even these Native American and Aboriginal uh, tribes, they themselves are hybrids. The Aboriginals say we came from the Pleiades. Some of the Native American tribes say we came from the Pleiades, but before that, we got to Australia first, and then from Australia, we went here, and we got here by using portals. And what's interesting is some of these hairy hominoids that um, Pi talks about. Lloyd Pi, he since passed away. The guy with the Star Child skull, which I've held at one time, and he did a great lecture on YouTube. You can find it about the origins of man, and everything you know is wrong. Well, he talks about how the Anunnaki may have utilized the DNA and genetics from a hairy hominoid in order to create their particular slave species. I believe that the Sumerian chronicles only depict what the Anunnaki did. It doesn't reflect the cosmology of all these other races on the planet, because a lot of these other races, the Aboriginals and Native Americans, they say, especially the Aboriginals, they say they got here like 1 million years ago. So that's like way before the what's described in the Sumerian cuneiforms. The Anunnaki were just, in the overall scheme of things, they may have been Johnny-come-latelys as far as the genetic engineering game, because in the universe, in the multiverse, DNA is currency, and within the DNA are latent metaphysical powers. And what do the Lakota say? Well, they came from the Sirius system, and it just varies. And so the point is, and let me just finish this point, that these Native Americans, these Aboriginals, they themselves are hybrids, but it's within their institutional memory and knowledge, they're taught how to use these things, right? These abilities. And what's interesting, what differentiates their star elders, if you will, and say the Anunnaki is the star elders of the Native Americans and the Aboriginals did not teach animal husbandry. They did not teach agriculture, because they were told and taught that those were inherently wrong things to do. Whereas the Anunnaki taught animal husbandry and agriculture, basically raped the land, basically abused the animals en masse, right? Which is something that the Native Americans and the Aboriginals never did. So that right off the bat, that tells me that their celestial origins are not the same. But the point of relevance here is that, well, we find many Native Americans that are Milabs because it's within their DNA profile. And then there are people with an Irish, Scottish, Celtic background, but also tied into this Native American, or in some cases, depending where they live, an Aboriginal connection. It runs the gamut. Many people from the former Soviet Union, the Baltic states, Germany, France. A lot of those are places where this tradition of what some refer to as mysticism and the ability to be seers and mystics and whatnot, it was the norm in their cultures until the Vatican and until the Church systematically eradicated that all. But not only are these deep black elements of the military trying to track these people down and utilize them as operatives and assets, but all along these elite, patriarchally oriented, reptilian controlled bloodlines have been identifying these people. And if they can't utilize them, then they will so disrupt their lives that they will never pose a threat to them. Because if they can't use them, they're going to so disrupt and destabilize their lives, or in some cases outright kill them, that they will not be a threat anymore.
We've hit the top of the first hour, so we're going to take a little break, and we'll be right back with James Bartley. We're back. That was Kazal Organism with Ori Shango, and we'll get right back into the interview with James Bartley.
A lot of these native traditions, native societies, they had the knowledge to build these megalithic structures. They have such a understanding of astronomy and different things like that. But then when they talk about interdimensionals, they talk about the gods and these kinds of things. You know, the other 90% of what they say is accepted, but then this 10% about the gods, it doesn't fit into the so-called, lamestream thinking. They throw that out, right?
Oh yes, it's cherry picking. It's classic cherry picking. Look at Egyptology, and Egyptology, as we understand it today, was bought and paid for and nurtured into existence by the Rockefellers. It was the Oriental Institute in Chicago that was initially funded by the Rockefellers, and out of that, we have the monstrosity that modern Egyptology is. Like for example, the cuneiform of the Sumerians. Now, these Sumerologists will go on and on and on. Oh, this one describes some kind of court proceeding. This one has to do with agricultural yields. Yeah, this one has to do with their form of jurisprudence. But when you start pointing out, oh, what about this stuff over here, where they say these gods came from some other world, and they genetically manipulated the inhabitants, and then created a genetics lab and created a slave worker class for themselves because they no longer wanted to work in these mines. The knee-jerk response is, "Oh, that's just like superstitious mumbo jumbo, right?" And what I see happening is that lamestream academia, especially archaeology, Egyptology, science, they're being left behind in the dust because they can no longer use their peer review process to batter into submission anyone who strays off the reservation and starts coming up with their own papers and coming up with these findings that are taboo. Because of the internet, we don't need them anymore. We don't need their permission. We don't need to go to them hat in hand. Oh, please, give your stamp of approval to these findings that we've come up with. We've left them in the dust. And so I just encourage your listeners to plug into the available information out there as far as non-human life forms and its long-standing ability to manipulate and control the surface population, and realize that the very words have been changed, just as anarchy has been changed into like depicting some freak busting out the windows in a Starbucks somewhere, right? The term myth or mythos from the Greek means narrative, truthful depiction, narrative. So they even took the meaning of the word myth and stood it on its head. This is what the Vatican did. This is what the church did. They took the word myth and made it seem as if it describes something that's not real or fantastical or illusionary, you see. And Jordan Maxwell, for one, talks a lot about etymology and the roots of words and then how we use words on a daily basis, which enmeshes us further into the simulation matrix. And that's a whole nother story.
Well, it's spelling, right? Spelling.
Yes. Yes.
Well,
You're right.
it was actually Jordan that kicked me off, got me started, really looking into this stuff. He had a show on KPFK in the early, maybe 2000, 2001, around then. And that's the first time I first started hearing stuff like you guys were researching at that time. And I found it really mind-blowing, so.
Well, Jordan was part of that crowd, that Southern California crowd. I spent many hours with him in San Diego, in Los Angeles, at the UFO friendship campouts, at the Little Alien. The couple that used to, I don't know if they still do, but they used to run the UFO friendship campouts, was Joe and Pat Travis. They bought the Rachel Bar and Grill, and then they changed the name of it to Little Alien. And they were featured in some documentaries, news documentaries by George Knapp, the KLAS Channel 8 investigative reporter, who was the one that broke the story about Bob Lazar and the work that he was doing on alien propulsion systems at S4 in the Nevada desert. Joe and Pat Travis were American heroes, and in the truest sense. No one will ever really know how much harassment they went through and all the ridicule they went through, but they made a serious effort to put these conferences together, and I gave a lecture there on one occasion, and I oftentimes accompanied fellow lecturers and supported them while they gave these talks. But they really made an effort to get a lot of good information out, and that was kind of a meeting place for a lot of us. All these Southern California conferences in Los Angeles, Orange County, and then sometimes in Nevada, and because in those days the International UFO Congress was really big, and so that would be a chance for us to meet our counterparts in other parts of the U.S. But like on 3-day holidays like Labor Day or I forgot the other one, 4th of July weekend, they would often have at the Little Alien in Rachel, Nevada, a UFO friendship campout. And a number of occasions, I spent a lot of time with Jordan Maxwell, and he was telling me everything he knew about the cult of Saturn, the new dawn of the new day, just going on and on. The guy is a walking encyclopedia.
See, I find this really interesting because I came in sort of after that era was coming to a close in the early 2000s, but it seemed like that 90s period, it was very hands-on. You guys were going to the Little Alien, going to campouts, going, seeing what you could see at Area 51.
Yeah.
I did an interview with Nora Hayakawa. I mean, people were very much out in the field.
Yes.
And I mean, how do you see what was going on then compared to today?
We had much more of a unified front back then, although especially in a field like ufology and hardcore UFO research, schisms and fractures would begin to occur. And like many, active UFO researchers, I have many ex-friends, which is sad, right? Some of the people that I was really close to, hugging friends, love you, buddy, love you, sis. We'll catch up some other time. A lot of those friendships that went by the wayside for one reason or another. That's kind of a human tragedy element to this too. But because of all the manipulation, because of all the scurrilous gossip, because of all the, axe grinding, and which is what it would be natural in hindsight to find all that going on, because they didn't want that unified front, and we really for a while did. Like nowadays, you have all these Milabs and so-called super soldiers slinging mud at each other all the time on the internet and on their own YouTube channels, and it wasn't like that in the old days. It was like when we heard about someone going through military abduction experiences, it's like we would do everything we can to find out more about that person, let them know that we were studying that into it also, and that we could be a source of support and encouragement for them, right?
Mm-hmm.
And back then, it's like we didn't have the internet back then, so we ran up a lot of phone bills, calling people across country. I spent a lot of time on the phone, just working the phones all the time, just picking up the phone, calling certain people in L.A., calling certain people in Vegas, calling certain people in Arizona, the greater tri-states area. It was very much hands-on, and like for example, a lot of the activity that Linda Moulton Howe was brought into, she was new to that particular aspect of it. She was taken by some of the locals in the high desert in the Antelope Valley to a place where she could see what some referred to as jumpers, these lighted craft that would appear in one part of the sky and disappear and manifest in another part of the sky, and it would just like appear and disappear all over the place. And they brought Linda Moulton Howe out there to see this. There's a place near Edwards Air Force Base which they called Mars Hill, the locals, where it was adjacent to and overlooked an area they referred to as Haystack Butte, and beneath Haystack Butte was a known underground base. There was some old dilapidated old structure there, whereas I can't remember what it was, a dairy farm or something. But beneath it, it was a tunnel entrance, an underground base entrance, and people would sit there on Mars Hill and they would see these craft flying around and whatnot, and That's what it was like in the old days. It was, and I never met Christopher O'Brien, but I interviewed him on my show way back then. He's the guy that wrote Mysterious Valley, about the San Luis Valley in southern New Mexico, northern Colorado. Some of my colleagues in the San Diego UFO Society went out there and spent some time with them. Some of my colleagues in the San Diego UFO Society went to Puerto Rico when Puerto Rico
Oh,
was
it's a hot
really
spot.
big,
Yeah.
a hot spot,
The
real
the
big.
underground, underwater UFOs.
Underwater,
Yeah.
Cabo Rojo, where the craft were coming out of the water, and and then to the fishermen it was old hat. And it was just another fish to them in many ways. There was El Yunque, the forest out there. I knew a number of people that went out there. I knew Mark Davenport was the partner of my friend Leah Haley. Leah Haley was one of the original Milabs that went forward, and she went through a lot of crap. And she was so mind controlled and so manipulated that now she's kind of did a 180 and said, "Oh, it's all just military. There's no aliens." But she wasn't saying that before, and I don't begrudge her for that, because she and I were good friends, and I know how her mind works. She was very reductionist. She was a CPA. She was very mathematically orientated. So she had to hang on to something that made sense to her. And so the idea that it was all just mind control, and she knew she was being mind controlled, made sense to her, and it allowed her to tune out and forget on a conscious level all the ET experiences she had. But she was another person that we worked with in network. She came from Mississippi and Alabama, and we used to bring her out to San Diego, and that's how it was. It was like I go to a lecture on say on a Saturday. We'd have our lecture at the San Diego UFO Society, and people from the Orange County and LA groups would come down to our lectures. And then, like the next week, when someone else would fly in, or a local person would give a lecture in Orange County or LA, we'd go up there, have car, we'll travel. I drove my little, car, my little 5-speed all over the Southwest. I mean, I made a number of trips to the Little Alien. I would pack like 5 people in that car or more, 6 people. And we'd make the drive up there. We'd stop off in Vegas, and then, refresh ourselves there, and then head off to the Little Alien. So, and we kept in close contact with our colleagues in the high desert, in Victorville and Barstow, in Apple Valley, the high desert there. We had our fingers on the pulse. We knew who was having experiences, who was having MyLab experiences. And again, this was all pre-internet. This was all by phone. This is all by letter, snail mail.
The stuff you talk about, James, and I did an interview with Eve Lorgan. I mean, it is pretty hardcore, but at the same time, I think it's very important to take the whole view of everything that's on the board. Whereas a lot of people, they only want to look at the love and light side, but if you're not looking at what's coming at you from your peripheral vision, I mean, to me, it's just to be balanced. You need to look at everything that's going on.
Yes, and people can get a mistaken impression and think that people like myself and Eve are inherently negative people. That's not the case. I mean, I talk about a lot of different things. I'm interested in a lot of different things. I like to think I have a sense of humor. You have to laugh at some of this stuff. It's so crazy, this world we live in. But yeah, for example, I've had a lot of positive experiences with positive ETs and higher dimensional spiritual beings, mystical experiences. But see, they're not the ones, I don't perceive them as being the ones causing these problems. You know what I mean?
Right.
So although I acknowledge them, I respect them, I thank them, for helping me out in the past and being there. It's, I've got a job to do. You know what I mean? And there's people that are out there suffering, and they need not only a conceptual framework to understand what it is they're going through, but they need validation. They need vindication, because the way this matrix has been set up, the ridiculing of witnesses and a debunking of these types of experiences by the controlled media it's taken on inertia and a life of its own that I don't even think the CIA controllers and disinformation artists at the time and beginning in 1953, when it was codified, the systematic debunking and ridiculing. I don't think they realized it would take on a life of its own, to the point now where there's this knee-jerk kind of giggle factor of little green men. Oh, that's just a psyop. There's no alien, just only military mind control. It's just blue beam. And see, they don't even know what they're talking about. People just have to make up their own minds about it. If they try to attack this from a logical perspective, the template that they're using has been corrupted, because the science that's being spewed out by the universities is bogus. The and paradoxically, the not paradoxically really, but in actual fact, the real physics is secreted in these deep black weird science projects, as well as in these mystical, magical secret society orders. They know the real nature of reality and how it can be morphed and twisted and bent to their will. But up on the surface, people are taught this mechanistic reductionist view, everything broken down to particles and atoms and everything, right?
Well, I think for a lot of us, it's not just the interest, but I know for myself, I kind of had to go this way because if you have some kind of traumas or primal wound with, the occult or some of this ET interdimensional aspect, the only way you're going to find your way back is to see the problem so you can fix it, right? And for many years, I didn't even remember what happened. So it was only from, years of peeling back those layers, and you think everything's okay, and then, oh, it's an onion and you got to peel more layers. But, after years and years of work, finally I could see what the problem was. And then I took holographic kinetics healing from Steve Richards.
Yes,
And,
yes.
I think it did. I don't think I could have gone there immediately. But since I had done like 10 years of work, by the time I heard about Steve Richards, that was like, the final step I think I needed to. There's always more work to do, but that was a major step that I feel like, okay, I'm a whole person again. So, that's what I'm saying about talking about this MyLab aspect and the abductions and the programs, because, it may not be for everybody, but for people that have this experience, they need to voice and talk about this and really understand their own experience and feel comfortable talking about it, I think.
Take ownership of it, and avoid being around people who are into shaming, right? Because there's a lot of the New Agers and a lot of the people that, quite frankly, have been mind controlled into thinking that all their experiences are positive. They're into shaming. Oh, well, you only think that your experience is negative is because you haven't worked through your inner shadow. You've drawn this negative experience to you. It's because you're spiritually retarded. You're vibrationally challenged, okay? Not to use a euphemism. Because a lot of these people, the false positives, as I call them, they're into shaming, right? The many paradoxically, they lack compassion, they lack empathy, they lack understanding, because any suggestion of anything negative in an ET, a non-human context, triggers the hell out of them, quite frankly. And some of these love and lighters, I mean, the claws come out the moment you bring up the subject, completely at variance with this whole love and light message they're putting out. The shaming, the gossiping, the demonizing, the cult-like behavior where they all band together and they shame others, and they either ostracize them or they shame them. So it's important to be around people who uplift you and encourage you and provide validation and vindication for you. Because, okay, let's just look at what humans can do. And remember what Tesla said, with resonance, anything is possible. Humans can astral travel. And again, read those books. I encourage your listeners to Beyond the Quantum and the Holographic Universe by Michael Talbot. These humans, and whether you call them adepts or you call them medicine men, medicine women, shamans, high priests, high priestesses, whatever particular tradition, whatever particular sect we're talking about, they know how to get the most of the human condition, and they know that we're made up of not just a physical body, but we have an emotional body, an energetic body, an astral body, so on and so forth. When these negative beings interact and mess with people, they interact with them in their totality. They not only will physically abduct them, but they can astrally abduct them too. They can also push their interdimensional body, if you will, into a sleeping human and take over their astral dreamscape and then uh, conduct what I call stage managed dreams, where they're compelled to dream stuff they normally wouldn't dream about, perverse things, sadistic things, depending on what the programming is, depending on what category that particular group of negative entities wants to slot a given person into. And if you notice, I mean, you're over there in Hollywood. The film industry, the entertainment industry, the news media is all the basic template is inducing OCD thought loops, repetitive imagery, repetitive memes. They want to embed, they want to like reroute these neural pathways and route it back to the primordial reptilian part of our brain. And folks, we really do have what's known as an R complex, a reptilian part of our brain. It's the oldest part of our brain. And so that's why they have all these reality shows where boorishness, irrationality, lunacy, it's all glorified. It's all made to seem trendy and chic. It's trendy and cool for people to yell and scream at each other and have no rationality, no compassion, no empathy for one another. And so all that is promoted, and then it's embedded into the conscious and the subconscious of society at large, collectively, right? And so that further embeds, and then you layer on top of that the shunning into the left hemisphere of the brain, the logical side, away from the intuitive side, which connects us to the divine source. And the logical side can be fed nothing but BS from this control system we call the institutions of learning, school, education, medicine, et cetera, et cetera. We're literally when you spend any amount of time with people embedded in the matrix, and when you listen to them talk, and when they try to talk about meaningful subjects, everything that comes out of their mouth is a lie or a distortion. And I just have to bite my lip. I just have to just tune it out because, it's like otherwise you're trying to undo a lifetime's worth of mind control and programming in one go. That's impossible. So I just tune it out. You know what I mean?
Well, I think people that are interested in this, it's either their life experience or have an interest in this whole area of the Milabs and the ET experiences. It's to get this kind of level of knowledge and understanding. It doesn't come without some level of sacrifice, because
yes,
Michael Tsarian talks about, if you start studying the hidden areas, the so-called occult, at a certain point you cross over into the occult world. You become separated from the world of the normal folks.
Yes.
And then you pop through, not the occult meaning bad, but just you're being inducted into this whole secret world that the normal people don't see.
This is absolutely the case, because when I first realized the key role the reptilians played in a lot of this, like a lot of the more mainstream abduction researchers obsessively talk about the Greys, and then hybrid variations of the Greys, but many of the Grey factions are basically gophers. They work within a reptilian sphere of influence. Definitely, some of them have their own agenda. They want to carve out their own niche. They want to, obtain a lot of DNA to further their own genetic hybridization programs. But many of these Grey and other ET factions work in a reptilian context. They do a lot of the heavy lifting for the reptilians, because this is a reptilian sphere of influence. And another major player is the mantis beings too. They don't get a lot of talk, but see that's a key point that you just made. One has to realize that there's a control system that spans space-time, because when I found out about the centrality of the reptilians, guess what? The reptilians started messing with me. It was like, oh, well, Bartley is like, he's found out about us. You know what I mean?
Well, I really didn't turn my focus to the whole ET alien area for years, because I was, looking at the whole, the more like patriot type stuff, like the sovereign citizen and, the Federal Reserve, and then going to, basically coming from one end. But then if you start looking at it long enough, it it sounds strange to a lot of people, but if you spend enough time, eventually, if you have an open mind, you are going to come to the area where you are, James. And it's like, you know, people are picking at these top layers, but if you really want to get to the core, and all good occultists know, as above, so below, right? I mean, these energetic dimensional levels, this is where it's all coming from.
Yes, it is. Because
So,
everything that manifests in the physical plane first manifested in the spiritual planes. And we only see a very small part of the multiverse around us, i.e., the visual spectrum. There's so much more. I mean, I've never seen, like, a virus, but I know they're real. I've never seen infrared rays. I know they're real. I've never seen gamma rays. I know they're real. I don't need to like read a bunch of books to know that those things are real, right? You have this notion that says, well, seeing is believing, but that's what constitutes proof, because it doesn't matter with these people that are hardcore skeptics, and the skepticism is in itself a form of mind control, because without exception, they're basing what they know or think they know on the bogus science models they've been indoctrinated with. Not even the same understanding of the cosmos and physics that the breakaway civilization, as Richard Dolan describes it, this deep black, weird science secret space program that where humans and non-humans interact on a moment-by-moment basis. Their understanding of cosmology and physics is entirely different. So the skeptics are making all these judgments based on a completely wrong model in the first place. And not only that, though, but if you just look at simple things like stellar formation and galactic formation, they're all wrong. The plasma electric model of the universe is the correct model, not this notion of how somehow all these hydrogen molecules all accumulated at one place, and pretty soon there was so much of it that it created all this pressure, and then miraculously it created this thermonuclear reactor within the core of it. It just one miracle heaped upon another, upon another, upon another, and all they got for proof is a long ass equation, right? That's all they've got.
well,
But
it's that old Catholic priest orthodoxy. It's the old
yes,
priesthood, but
yes, it's
now
the priesthood.
recast into the science of religion. I
Well,
mean,
that's
the
it.
religion of
Science
science.
isn't.
Yeah.
It is a science with its
Yeah.
dogmas, with its intolerance,
Yeah.
with its judgmentalism. That's exactly what it is. And ironically, the flip side of that is New Ageism, if that's a word, right? The same dogmas, intolerance, judgmentalism. They have their own jargon, right?
One reason I really love listening to James talk is he is a true researcher, and true science is all about empirical data, right? Really seeing what's out there. And you're not just talking from things that you read on the internet or heard from somebody. I mean, you were really out in the field. That's in that time when you were with the San Diego group, and I understand that you did some, quote unquote reptilian stakeouts, and actually going
Yes.
out
Oh,
to some
God.
areas. So, that
Yes.
is, because I really want to impress on people. This is not just, James is just talking out of nowhere. Like, these were actual things that happened. Eve Lorgan was in your group.
Yeah.
And even, I understand that they had writers from the X-Files getting stories from these
Yes.
MUFON groups. I mean,
Yes.
all these things about hybrids and super soldiers and Milabs that were in the X-Files series in the 90s, it was coming from you guys.
Well, yes, some of it was, and not only that though. This is before social media, but we were by then the internet had kicked in.
Uh-huh.
So what a lot of us did was we would not only would we do the phone calling and ask each other, oh, do you remember what happened last night? I had experience. I saw you in it, so on and so forth. And then I saw Sally in it too, and then we call Sally up and see what she remembers. But then when the internet came along, we started emailing each other. Well, this is my dream last night. This is my experience last night. I had a flashback memory. And so we would get this correspondence going back and forth with a number of people. And lo and behold, before too long, some literally, and I absolutely place my hand on my heart and I swear this to be a fact. A number of the subjects we discussed in these private emails and in these phone calls later wound up being themes in science fiction movies and TV series. So it was as if, and I know for a fact that for a while, a lot of my email traffic was being routed to a university in Southern California that has overt contracts with NSA. It's a collection point center where a lot of my stuff was side routed at one point. But so they were taking all of our raw intel and they were making movies and TV shows out of it. But that in itself, it's a way of inoculating the public, right? Oh, well, yeah, I've heard of those stories, but you know what? I saw that in a movie too. So it's like, yeah, I don't really think it's real. I think you just saw that in a movie. Well, when ironically, it was something that we experienced, right? Like, for example, one of the gals that I debriefed and wrote up an interview with, she was the first person, as far as I know, to use the term push. The reptilian human hybrids that she was forced to train to help assimilate them in the human society. Well, some of them were quite violent and would rape her and abuse her and yell at her. And they had a way of what she called pushing their thoughts into her mind. And she was defenseless to stop them from doing this to her. They not only would they push all these thoughts in her mind, but there'd be an overlay of anger and rage on top of that. Lo and behold, there's before too long a movie comes out called The Push, and it's about these people. I don't know, they're like mutants or X-Men or hybrids or something, and they're worldwide, and they have a variety of powers and psychic abilities, and they're being tracked by this woo-woo government worldwide spanning agency called the Division. And the guy who played the main role in that movie is the guy who's now playing Captain America. And he also played Johnny Storm in the Fantastic Four. You know what's ironic is I used to be a comic book nut. If I'd saved all my Marvel comics, DC, Gold Key, and all these other ones, if I saved all my baseball cards and football cards, oh shoot. Anyway, kept them all in mint condition. It's another story. But the guy that plays Captain America, plays Johnny Storm in the Fantastic Four, he played this psychic in The Push. And see, I wrote an interview about that, and where the gal was saying they push these thoughts in your head. Well, and suddenly there's a whole movie about that theme.
Well, in the 90s, it might have been too early, but if it was now, there might be a Filipino researcher in a new movie called The Push.
Well, what's interesting is there's one Asian guy, but to me he looks more Japanese, or it's that science fiction movie that came out in the 90s. He's interacting with these aliens. He's always on a ship, and he's got these aliens scurrying around. He's doing his bidding, basically. He kind of went dark side. You know what I mean? I don't even know the name of it, but it's out there somewhere, and I've got to do some research on it. But it was out there for a while. But he was like the only Asian person in the whole cast, and he played like a key role in the show. And you probably saw it at some point.
Well,
right.
Well, you really have to break down the story about the stakeouts that you guys used to do, because that's really interesting.
Yeah, and I should point out that some of us, again, a lot of us had astral abilities, a lot of us had remote viewing abilities, so we would pull our resources. If we knew there was a particular underground base where military and reptilians shared the facility. And indeed, we had known some people, were close friends with certain people that were taken there as Milabs, right? So not only would they have eyes on the ground, so to speak, and would have memories of some of the layout, but some of the people that we networked with and were our Milab friends were world-class remote viewers. So we would remotely view these facilities too, right? And we'd draw out the layouts and whatnot. And so it wasn't just physical investigations. Some of us did, like some of us astrally broke in to a number of these underground bases. And some of these underground bases have astral countermeasures. They have a system set up whereby an astral operator, astral spy, gets stuck and sitting at a console. He can't get up. She can't get up. And the panic starts to set in. Oh, they're going to find me, And they're sitting in front of a large console of like gray-looking kind of military hardware-looking stuff, and they panic that because they can't get up, they're stuck. They force themselves to go back to their body, right? So we were doing things like that, and also the physical uh, investigations, the field investigations. We would we would hike to the places where we knew there were either joint military reptilian ET underground bases, or in some cases were reptilian bases. Some of us, we went down as far as we could go to some of these places. You know what I mean? And when we looked around, right? So I mean, I wouldn't recommend that, but that was just some of the things we did back then. And the reptilian stakeouts came about because a dear friend of mine, who's since gone public in a very big way in Monsters and Mysteries in America. In fact, they wanted me to come on as a consultant because I have such a, you know, vituperative kind of mistrust of any form of mass media. I blew them off. And Discovery Channel always tries to get me on there. This wasn't Discovery Channel, but to give an example, Discovery Channel frequently tries to get me on their mockumentaries, but I always blow them off. I don't even respond. And so I treated Monsters and Mysteries the same way. Lo and behold, they go and get Nick Redfern to pinch hit for me, so to speak. And that kind of irked me. I should have gone ahead and did it instead of someone like him, who's a Roswell debunker, basically, but that's another story. But anyway, my friend who appeared in that segment lived in the high desert near Victorville, Southern California. And she was having military and reptilian and gray and encounters with a number of different beings. A couple of years ago, in her old house, she began seeing portals open up and literal demon-looking entities coming out of it. Demons, like all red with red glowing eyes and little horns in their head, and would crawl out of a portal and mess with her, and then after a while I'll go back, right? That happened for a while. And back then, this is like the 90s, we called that place the hot zone. Yeah, Eve Lorgan came up with that term because so much was going up there and so much was going on, so much military reptilian stuff going on. And in her house, in this gal's house, there were active portal entries, one of which was in the children's bedroom in the closet, what they call the wardrobe, like in England or some place like that. Lion Witch in the wardrobe. I mean, the stories of like portals and beings coming out of closets and wardrobes and people going into closets and going in other dimensions. Those stories have been around for ages, literally. As a matter of fact, the serial killer, Ted Bundy, and a serial killer is nothing more than a garden variety reptilian human hybrid or Draco human hybrid who's been groomed from birth literally to become a serial murderer. And many of these serial murderers are compelled by their what I call familiars. They're the reptilian or Draco physical and or interdimensional guides, if you will. They are compelled by these entities to get into hardcore ceremonial magic. That's one thing these FBI profilers don't want you to know, that a lot of these serial killers are into hardcore black magic and Satanism and the whole bit. But anyway, back to that house. There was an active portal entry in that closet. And what we used to do was, and there was portals in different parts of the house too, in the living room, but most of the activity was in that bedroom, and the children didn't sleep there anymore. Now, what was interesting is the youngest daughter, and she was just a little kid at the time, used to play with an immature reptoid that would come out of the closet. They would sit there and they would play with her toys. She had this toy that looked like a telephone with a keypad on it that had numbers and letters on it, and when you pressed a certain letter or number, it would make a certain tone. And there were times when nobody was in that house, or rather in that room, and they would hear these tones coming from that toy. Well, one fine day, my friend walks into that bedroom and finds her daughter sitting Indian style on the floor with this immature reptoid, playing with that phone, getting tones out of it. She brought like a plate of snacks for her and her quote invisible friend, because the little girl told my friend is here, he's from the closet. And she knew the reptilians were real because she was being raped by them and being messed with them. but she didn't want to think that her daughter was interacting with them, so she kind of just wrote it off to her imagination. She walks in with a couple of plates for her and her imaginary friend, just to placate her, right? And the moment she looks down and sees this little reptoid, she freaks out and drops the plate, and the plates go crashing and breaking into bits. The little reptoid runs into the closet and disappears. Now, when you look at the closet, what you see when you open it wide is a jam-packed closet. You see a clothes hamper in there. You see a bunch of like carpets and throw rugs piled up. You see a whole bunch of hangers. There's no room in there, but it's an interdimensional energetic thing. It's not necessarily a physical thing. And more than just little reptoids came in and out of there, but big ones, the adults came out of there. And these reptilians can mimic voices too. So if you're in a house, well, it happened with her a lot. She'd be alone in the house. The kids would be off at school or preschool, and her husband at the time would be at work. She would hear her children's voices in that children's bedroom, and she knew they were not home. Okay, and there's a relevance to this, because one of the first times we did a reptilian stakeout there, I brought me, a buddy, my lab buddy from Las Vegas came down, and a friend of mine. He was an old submariner with the old Navy, and also he was a remote viewer. Actually, he was used by some deep black agency back in the day to remote view, right? And he has an interesting story about what he remotely viewed at Dulce, but that's a whole other story. Anyway, he accompanied us there, and me and my buddy from Vegas slept in the bedroom. And the older guy, the submariner, he slept out in the living room. And what he said was he heard us just talking and joking and laughing, and he thought, oh, they're having a good time in there, you know. But eventually we settled down and went to sleep. But he continued to hear all the talking and laughing and joking. What he was really hearing was the mimicry from the reptilian, because we'd already bedded down. We flipped a coin. This is how we used to do it. If I won or he won, he'd get the bed, and the other guy would sleep on the floor in the sleeping bag, right? So one of us was on the bed, one of us was on the floor. And what happened was that night, I woke up paralyzed, and there was a big reptilian standing over me. No, I think I was on the floor that night. And it was looming over me, and I was immobilized. I was scared, right? And I couldn't make a peep. I couldn't move a muscle. I was completely paralyzed. And it just stood and loomed over me for a while, and then it disappeared. Now, then the next time I went up there, I brought another friend of mine from Vegas. And I since had a falling out with this guy, but he had an expensive camera, a motion picture, a movie camera, basically, advanced for the time. He used to do weddings and do that kind of commercial work. Anyway, he and a friend of his show up, and we went into that bedroom again, okay, and we drew lots, and one of us got the bed, and the other two were on the floor. He aimed his camera at the closet, and we opened it like about 6-7 inches wide, and we aimed the camera at the gap in the closet. It was one of those sliding closet doors, right, on rollers, and we talked for a while. Eventually, we fell asleep, right, and then when we got up the next morning, we headed out to the Little Alien because the guy that who had the camera, he was giving a lecture, right? So I accompanied him. We went up there, and then when we got to the our trailer at the Little Alien, which Pat and Joe Travis provides gratis for the speakers and their guests, then we decided to play the video, right? So we hooked up the video and we played it, and for about 40 minutes, all you could hear is us snoring, basically, right? And then suddenly we heard a growl, and we all just screamed, "Whoa!" Then we heard about 3 more growls, real loud, real angry, coming from the direction of the closet. And we were just all freaking out, and we were all excited and happy and all this other stuff, right? Now, since then, like I said, I had a falling out with that guy. He spun this tale about how, oh, well, I played the thing back and mysteriously the growls are gone. And sometimes that does happen, okay? But in his case, I think he's lying, right? But it's irrelevant because we don't hang out anymore and have not for a long time. Just another friendship that went by the wayside. But there was another time when my friend was cleaning the house in preparation for me showing up because I used to spend weekends there, sleeping in that bedroom, right? And she just cleaned the bathroom in the hallway, and she she thought to herself, "Oh, did I put a bar of soap in there? I have to go check." She walks into the bathroom, and she steps on the tail of an immature reptoid. It squeals, she said, like a pig. It ran into the children's bedroom and disappeared in the closet again, right? So those kinds of things happened. Uh, at one point, she convinced herself that it was all a dream, that she was losing her mind. And then the following morning, after the kids were off at school, these two immature reptoids showed up. And I used to show this sketch. I think I still do once in a while when I do my lectures. But a sketch was drawn of this scene. And these two little immature reptoids, we call them baby Godzillas because that's kind of like what they look like. And when they're fully grown, they're like 6.5 feet tall. They're black. They're dark green, blackish, and they're quite robust in the chest. Big arms, big chest, very robust. Anyway, one of the two little reptoids had this rod-like device, activated it and made her levitate, lie horizontal, in a horizontal position, with her back to the floor and facing upwards, and they suspended her in midair like that in her own kitchen, as if to say, and she got very much got the mental impression that they were asking her, "Do you think this is just a hallucination?" Right? And there was a whole bunch of. I mean, one time one of those little reptoid suckers knocked me out. Yes, it was like. Uh, I was sleeping on the bed. My friend was sleeping on the floor. I heard a rustling coming up from the closet. Sunlight was starting to, the sun was rising. Sunlight was coming through the curtains. I heard jostling in the closet. I sat up in bed and then bop on my left and my right cheek, knocked me out, right? And I felt like pain in my cheeks, on my face for weeks after that. I mean, I'm glad he didn't scratch me, and that's happened before too. But little sucker punched me out.
And you guys were there not just to investigate, but this is also moral support, right?
Oh, she was a dear friend of ours. I mean, we loved her, and we still do. It was like because she was having military stuff too. She was getting abducted by the military, mind controlled, and intimidated. The military would come to her house, and there were various ways they would extract her. Like, they would sometimes teleport her right out of her house, and then they did it the old-fashioned way too, where they would show up in a white van after her husband had gone off to work. The military would come right up to the door, and they would have this black box, and then they would activate this black box, and it would knock out anyone and anything in the house except the person that they were going to extract. For example, at the time, she had a big Rottweiler, she had a smaller dog, and she had a cat. So they could tweak the knobs on this thing and then basically make the animals sleep. And then they would take her away, bring her either to the underground base, which we had investigated, or they would take her to a corporate office in town, where they would like debrief her or do other things to her.
I bring up this whole aspect of the stakeouts that you guys were doing because it really shows you guys were hot on the trail of this reptilian aspect, which, I was kind of paying attention to some of these books like Whitley Strieber, the Communion with the Greys, but that whole time it really seemed like looking back, listening to your research, it was okay to talk about Greys. You could talk about Nordics and Ascended Masters and this and that, but it's like the reptilians is a really taboo subject. and now it's just like we've been saying in this interview, it's this reptilian aspect that really seems to be key to what's going on in the political, economic, social sphere. You know.
Yes, and what's important to point out is that shapeshifting is real, and people don't actually hybridize people don't only shapeshift in the reptilians. That's a common misnomer, misunderstanding, excuse me, because they can shapeshift into whatever kind of DNA that they have like too much of, right? Because certain psychics can see the entity overshadowing the host human. They can see, oh, that person right there, he's a host for a reptilian entity. That person over there, they're a host for a mantis entity. That person has a gray indwelling within them. And some people have like more positive beings, sometimes indwelling within them too. You know what I mean? So, but sometimes when the shapeshifting occurs, they don't only shapeshift into reptilians, they can shapeshift into some other being, but people will automatically think that, oh, that person must be reptilian. Well, not necessarily. But the reptilian hybrids and the Draco hybrids, they have pronounced anatomical features.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, just think of your average serial murderer, right? Eyes sunk deep in the eye sockets, pronounced cheekbones, sometimes an angular face. Just look at the rogues gallery of all these different serial killers, like uh, Gacy of
Well,
Ted
there's
Bundy, and
some ET researchers that are somewhat suspicious looking, also.
oh yes, and some of them are reptilian shapeshifters. I encourage the listeners to go to the YouTube channel called Frequency Fence, and that guy, I'm assuming it's a guy, it could be a gal, has done outstanding work. And I must give credit to all the people out there that spend thousands of man hours and woman hours, looking at the space imagery from the SOHO, solar observatory satellite, the ISS footage, the Google Mars and Google Earth and Google Moon, and then they really put a lot of time into this, as does the people who spend a lot of time reviewing all the news footage and all the other footage available from archival sources to look for that elusive shapeshift. And see, there's a method to that madness. So when all these Fox News presenters keep shapeshifting, because the camera can pick up these changes, right? And much quicker than a human can. Now, like I said, some people can see the entity overshadowing the human, right? But not everyone can. In fact, most can't. But that may change over time. Who knows? Because the fundamental contours are changing. But the camera can pick up these changes, and sometimes they're very subtle, and they're very quick. Like momentarily, the eyes may become vertical, or the color of their skin changes to dark green or something, or bony protuberances start jutting out of their not only their face but the rest of their body, and so people need to plug into that, because that's real. Some of it has deliberately been faked just to throw people off the scent, but a lot of it is real. And I believe the reason why so many Fox News presenters, in particular, keep shapeshifting is the underlying subtext is we, the reptilians, in our example, are telling you, the drooling TV fluoridated news viewers, we're telling you what to think, what to believe, who to hate, who to fear, what to obsess upon, whatever trivialities of the day we know will keep you spinning your wheels. We're the ones doing that, and here we are shape-shifting every once in a while, right?
Well, James, we've talked for about 2 hours, and we've barely scratched the surface, but I really wanted to lay out kind of where your research started, kind of what was going on in the 90s, when you were out in the field and discovering all these things about, this kind of reptilian agenda that was going on. But I never want to leave people without some positive messages or things that
Yes.
they can do. What can people do? Some positive steps that people can do in the face of kind of like this frequency battle that's going on.
Yeah, very good point. It is a frequency war, and we're being hammered all across the board by things that alter our frequency and alter our our very DNA. So the answers are always found within. Uh, Thinking is too slow. We have to get back to this expanded awareness, expanded consciousness. When an animal that is subject to predation, excuse me, senses danger in the wild, they don't stop and ask themselves, "Did I hear a sound? Is that a scent of a predator I picked up? Should I be worried about this?" No, they pick up a change in the vibration, a change in their surroundings, and they bolt because they don't think about it, right? Thinking is too slow, and so we have to get back to this expanded awareness, and we have to embrace our our totality, our masculine selves, the divine masculine and the divine feminine, and they have to work in concert with one another. And I don't have all the answers. I'm not a completely healed person yet. I'm still a work in progress. Uh, but I do believe that we are riding a frequency wave. The fundamental constants are changing. The mainstream physicists are freaking out because even normally stable elements like carbon-14 are exhibiting rapid decay. So in other words, in Star Trek terms, we're carbon-based units. That means we're becoming more energetic. So it doesn't matter how much they chemtrail us and how all the rage frequencies they pump out and all the useless drip trivia media and entertainment they show us designed to keep us at a low vibratory ebb. If we tune that out and just ride this frequency wave and use what tools we have available. You go on YouTube, you can listen to the 538 hertz heart center vibe. You can listen to to music in the 432 hertz frequency, which is the way it should have been instead of the discordant 440 hertz frequency. You can listen to I like to listen to underwater sounds from whales and cetaceans. I like to hear the sounds of dolphins and whatnot. And in the other tab, I play like the heart center vibe frequency, or like a grounding frequency. So there's different things you can do, and also tools like tensor rings. I've got my Rife machine behind me pumping out the heart center vibe, right? And so and also we have to learn how to practice mental hygiene too, because what the system pushes is vulgarity, is perversity, is sadism, is narcissism, and it's all across the board. So we have to work that much harder at going within, staying heart-centered, maintaining our inner harmony, equilibrium. No matter what's going on around us, we have to develop almost this water off a duck's back kind of mentality and sensibility. It's because I have a righteous streak of injustice running down my back a mile wide. When I read about kids being harmed and when I read about all this injustice going on, it can tend to dysregulate me, let's say. So I have to work that much harder. Okay, you know what? It's like that whole paradigm is being dismantled, right? Eventually it's going to go by the wayside, and because we're riding this frequency wave. And also the intensified cosmic energy streaming in from the galactic core. We're in alignment with the galactic core again. What Dr. Paul Laviolette talks about, the galactic superwave. And so, I consciously put out the intention, hey, all these energies streaming in from the galactic core, they're enhancing me, they're upgrading me. I'm once again becoming the quantum multidimensional being I used to be, right? Way back when, or in some parallel reality somewhere, because all of our seemingly disparate selves in the past, present, future, eternal now, they're all guided and under the umbrella, if you will, of our oversoul, and through that our direct connection to divine source. So people that have like a fundamentalist bent may not believe in reincarnation or whatever, or it may not rub them quite the right way, but for those of us who believe in it and even have memories of past lives and whatnot, well, it's something that you can embrace and not wallow in it in an unproductive way or obsess on it, but recognize that it's a part of you that may still need healing, and that eventually we're going to reconnect with all our parts of ourselves and reintegrate, and that's what it's all about. So if all each one of your listeners do is heal as much as possible and reintegrate, by natural course, you will begin to pull in higher and higher dimensional frequencies, and you will anchor them and you will infuse them into the earth grid, and you will be helping this planet, right? So, and that's why it's important that we just maintain our inner harmony, and work and interact with people that are pretty much on the same page, and avoid as much as possible bad association in the form of negative, toxic people that have all these obsessive compulsive issues, and narcissism issues, and substance abuse issues. I mean, we can like love on them, we can encourage them, but we, at the same time, we can't let them, if they're on a different journey from us, we can't let them drag us down, because we got work we got to do.
Just as I said when I was talking to Eve Lorgan, you guys are highlighting some pretty hardcore topics, but at the same time, this is really all about healing and reintegrating
Yes.
and self-empowerment. So, the message isn't to dwell on all these, kind of dark aspects, but to really shine the light so we can heal and make this planet whole again.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you, Masaki, for having me on. And sometime down the road, if you'd like, I'd be delighted to come back on here. It's been an honor. Thank you so much.
Been great having you, James, and we'll talk to you soon.
Bye for now.